Continuing the preface to the Upanishads, translated by Max Muller. Voter novel traduction monster nas confirm dans said jugement tout la collège des guebres ara 8 bu nas la asur nas ne croirons jamais quella charlatan les moins habiles et pu écrire les fadaces dont vox dux derniers volumes sont remplis. The same, volume 10, page 408, Sir W. Jones's works. One of the things is sometimes the interpretation wasn't right, that even the person who had an experience gave. But that doesn't mean they didn't have the experience. And it's better to just say, I don't know, right? He at last sums up his argument in the following words: U Zoroaster n'avait et pas les sens comme où il n'écrivait pas les livres de pas lu attributs s'il n'avait pas les sens communs et fallait les laisser dans la foule et dans l'obscurité s'il n'écrivait pas que livre il était impudent de la publier sous son nom en ses ouvrages avait insulte les gaouts de public en lui présentant des statistiques où vos l'avez trompé en lui donnant des fausses et de chaque côté vos mérites son mépris. The same, volume 10, page 437. Now, one of the things about that, other than my French is not good, is that a lot of things are obscure, and therefore we run our mouths and make judgments. And, like, if you look at what the Bible says, or what some of the Buddhist or other scriptures say about certain entities, you would reject that they had any prophetic gift, at least to distinguish one source from another. But then you find out that it wasn't even written in their language, or, something else that makes it clear that, maybe those problems were just the priests putting their own things in. And common sense, that again varies. And just because it's our custom doesn't mean, that it's right for everybody. This alternative holds good no longer. The sacred code of Zoroaster or of any other of the founders of religions may appear to us to be full of absurdities, or may in fact really be so, and it may be yet the duty of the scholar to publish, to translate, and to carefully examine those codes as memorials of the past, as the only trustworthy documents in which to study the growth and decay of religion. Well, if you look at modern law, a lot of the laws that they have on the books that they enforce are just not necessary. It does not answer to say that if Zoroaster was what we believe him to have been, a wise man in our sense of the word, he could not have written the rubbish which we find in the Avesta, if we are at once satisfied that the text of the Avesta or the Veda or the Tripitaka is old and genuine, and that this text formed the foundation on which, during many centuries, the religious belief of millions of human beings was based. It becomes our duty both as historians and philosophers to study these books, to try to understand how they could have arisen, and how they could have exercised for ages an influence over human beings who in all other respects were not inferior to ourselves, nay, whom we are accustomed to look up to on many points as patterns of wisdom, of virtue, and of taste. The facts, such as they are, must be faced. And if the study of the ancient religions of the world is ever to assume a really historical character, and having myself grudged no praise to what my mind is really beautiful or sublime in the early revelations of religious truth, I feel the less hesitation in fulfilling the duty of the true scholar in placing before the historians and philosophers accurate, complete, and unembellished versions of some of the sacred books of the East. Well, their Quran one is harsh in places and put as piecemeal. So there's that example. Such versions alone will enable them to form a true and just estimation of the real development of early religious thought, so far as we can still gain a sight of it in literary records, to which the highest human or even divine authority has been ascribed by the followers of the great religions of antiquity. It often requires an effort to spoil a beautiful sentence by a few words which might so easily be suppressed, but which are there in the original and must be taken into account quite as much as the pointed ears in the beautiful faun of the capital. We want to know the ancient religions such as they really were, not such as we wish they should have been. We want to know not their wisdom only, but their folly also. And while we must learn to look up to their highest points where they seem to rise nearer to heaven than anything we were acquainted with before, we must not shrink from looking down to their stony tracks, their dark abysses, their muddy moraines, in order to comprehend both the height and the depth of human mind in its searchings after the infinite. I can answer for myself, and for those who have worked with me, that our translations are truthful, that we have suppressed nothing, that we have varnished nothing, however hard it seemed sometimes even to write it down. There is only one exception. There are in ancient books, particularly in religious books, frequent allusions to the sexual aspect of nature, which, though perfectly harmless and innocent in themselves, cannot be rendered in modern language without the appearance of coarseness. We may regret that it should be so, but tradition is too strong on this point, and I have therefore felt obliged to leave certain passages untranslated and to give the original when necessary in a note. But this has been done in extreme cases only, and many things which we should feel inclined to suppress have been left in all their outspoken simplicity. Well, what about the Song of Solomon and that passage in Ezekiel and the one in Genesis and, because those who want to study ancient man must learn to study him as he really was, an animal with all the strength and weakness of an animal, though an animal that was to rise above himself, and in the end discover his true self after many struggles and many defeats. After this first caution, which I thought was due to those who might expect to find in these volumes nothing but gems, I feel I owe another to those who may approach these translations under the impression that they have only to read them in order to gain an insight into the nature and character of the religions of mankind. There are philosophers who have accustomed themselves to look upon religions as things that can be studied as they study the manners and customs of savage tribes, by glancing at the entertaining accounts of travelers or missionaries, and then classing each religion under such wide categories as fetishism, polytheism, monotheism, and the rest. That is not the case. Translations can do much, but they can never take the place of the originals, and if the originals require not only to be read, but to be read again and again, translations of sacred books require to be studied with much greater care before we can hope to gain a real understanding of the intentions of their authors, or venture on general assertions. Such general assertions, if once made, are difficult to extirpate. It has been stated, for instance, that the religious notion of sin is wanting altogether in the hymns of the Rig Veda, and some important conclusions have been based on this supposed fact. Yet, the gradual growth of the concept of guilt is one of the most interesting lessons which certain passages of these ancient hymns can teach us. It has been asserted that in the Rig Veda, Agni, fire, was adored essentially as earthly sacrificial fire, and not as an elemental force. How greatly such an assertion has to be qualified may be seen from a more careful examination of the translations of the Vedic hymns. Now accessible. M.M. History of Ancient Sanskrit Literature, 2nd edition, 859, page 540. Oh, that was the previous note. Ludwig Rigveda Brasetse, Volume 3, page 331. Muller, Sanskrit Text, Volume 5, page 199. On the latter growth of Agni, see a very useful essay by Holtzmann, Agni nach den Vorstellungen des Mahabharata, 1878. In many parts of the Avesta, fire is no doubt spoken of with great reverence, but those who speak of the Zoroastrians as fire worshippers should know that the true followers of Zoroaster abhor that very name, and the true followers of Zoroaster don't worship anything but God. Mazda Yesna has our, that's what that means. They don't. Their hymns, their songs, their praise, their worship, their celebrations. It's all for God. They worship around a fire. It's not the same thing. Again, there are certainly many passages in the Vedic writings which prohibit the promiscuous communication of the Veda. But those who maintain that the Brahmins, like Roman Catholic priests, keep their sacred books from the people, must have forgotten the many passages in the Brahmanas, the Sutras, and even in the laws of Manu, where the duty of learning the Veda by heart is inculcated for every Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaisya, that is, for every man except a Sudra. These are a few specimens only to show how dangerous it is to generalize, even when there exists a complete translation of certain sacred books. It is far easier to misapprehend or even totally to misunderstand a translation than the original, and it should not be supposed because a sentence or a whole chapter seems at first sight unintelligible in a translation, that therefore they are indeed devoid of all meaning. What can be more perplexing than the beginning of the Khandogya Upanishad? Let a man meditate, we read. Or, as others translate it, let a man worship the syllable Om. It may seem impossible at first sight to elicit any definite meaning from these words and from much that follows after. But it would be a mistake, nevertheless, to conclude that we have here vox et prateria nihil. Meditation on the syllable Om consisted in the long-continued repetition of that syllable with the view of drawing the thoughts away from all other subjects and thus concentrating them on some higher object of thought of which that syllable was made to be the symbol. This concentration of thought, ekagrata, or one-pointedness, as the Hindus called it, is something to us almost unknown. Our minds are like kaleidoscopes of thoughts in constant motion, and to shut our mental eyes to everything else, while dwelling on one thought only, has become to most of us almost as impossible as to apprehend one musical note without harmonies. With the life we are leading now, with telegrams, letters, newspapers, reviews, pamphlets, and books ever breaking in upon us, it has become impossible, or almost impossible, ever to arrive at that intensity of thought which the Hindus meant by ekagrata, and the attainment of which was to them the indispensable condition of all philosophical and religious speculation. The loss may not be altogether on our side, yet a loss it is, and if we see the Hindus, even in their comparatively monotonous life, adopting all kinds of contrivances in order to assist them in drawing away their thoughts from all disturbing impressions and to fix them on one subject only, we must not be satisfied with smiling at their simplicity, but try to appreciate the object they had in view. when by means of repeating the syllable Om, which originally seemed to have meant that or yes, they had arrived at a certain degree of mental tranquility. The question arose what was meant by this Om, and to this question the most various answers were given, according to as their mind was to be led up to higher and higher objects. Thus, in one passage we are told at first that Om is the beginning of the Veda, or as we have to deal with an Upanishad or the Samaveda, the beginning of the Samaveda, so that he who meditates on Om may be supposed to be meditating on the whole of the Samaveda. But that is not enough. Om is said to be the essence of the Samaveda, which, being almost entirely taken from the Rig Veda, may itself be called the essence of the Rig Veda. And more than that, the Rig Veda stands for all speech, the Samaveda for all breath of life, so that Om may be conceived again as the symbol of all speech and all life. Om thus becomes the name not only of all our physical and mental powers, but especially of the living principle, the prana or spirit. This is explained by the parable in the 2nd chapter, while in the 3rd chapter, that spirit within us is identified with the spirit in the sun. Therefore, he who meditates on Om meditates on the spirit in man as identical with the spirit in nature are in the sun, and thus the lesson that is meant to be taught in the beginning of the Khandogya Upanishad is really this, that none of the Vedas with their sacrifices and ceremonies could ever secure the salvation of the worshipper, i.e., that sacred works performing according to the rules of the Vedas are of no avail in the end, but that meditation on Om alone, or that knowledge of what is meant by Om alone, can procure true salvation or true immortality. Well, can't you say that it's not the rituals, but the consciousness, the intention, the principles, right? Thus, the pupils led step by step to what is the highest object of the Upanishads, viz. The recognition of the self in man as identical with the highest self or Brahman. The lessons which are to lead up to that highest conception of the universe, both subjective and objective, are no doubt mixed up with much that is superstitious and absurd. Still, the main object is never lost sight of. Thus, when we come to the 8th chapter, the discussion, though it begins with Om, or the Udgita, ends with the question of the origin of the world, and though the final answer, namely that Om means either Aksha, ether, and that ether is the origin of all things, may still sound to us more physical than metaphysical. Still, the description given of ether or Akasa shows that more is meant by it than the physical ether, and that ether is in fact one of the earlier and less perfect names of the infinite, of Brahman, the universal self.